You know, when you close your eyes and picture Noah's Ark, there is almost certainly a very specific image that pops into your head.
Oh, definitely.
Right, it's probably the one from, like, a childhood nursery rhyme book. A
Yeah.
tiny, round, almost cartoonish little wooden boat just bobbing on the water.
Usually with an impossible amount of animals crammed onto the top deck.
Exactly. It's practically bursting at the seams,
Yeah.
right? You've got a giraffe's neck sticking out of the top, an elephant's trunk hanging over the side, maybe a couple of monkeys swinging from the rafters.
Yeah, the classic Sunday school illustration.
Yeah, and it looks less like a functional vessel of survival and more like, I don't know, a floating clown car.
It is an incredibly enduring, culturally ubiquitous image. But when you actually look at the historical texts and the modern engineering models based on them, that illustration is completely disconnected from any kind of physical reality.
Right, and that disconnect is exactly what we are exploring today. Welcome to the Paradigm Split. We are so glad you're joining us.
Always great to be here.
Today's deep dive is custom tailored specifically for you, the curious, knowledge-seeking mind that just isn't satisfied with the nursery rhyme version of history.
Because there is so much more to the actual data.
There really is. Our mission today is to explore the fascinating engineering and the honestly highly complex biological logistics of Noah's Ark. Specifically, we're looking through the lens of modern creationist research.
Right, we've been synthesizing a massive amount of data from organizations like Answers in Genesis, the Institute for Creation Research, which is often called ICR, and the physical models presented at the Ark Encounter over in Kentucky.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the gap between the cultural myth and the data proposed by these research models is staggering.
It's night and day. The goal of these researchers has really been to take the brief descriptions found in the Genesis account and apply rigorous stress testing, maritime engineering principles, and biological modeling.
Just to see if the structure was actually feasible.
Exactly. And the resulting blueprint they've developed is incredibly intricate.
Many people look at that little toy boat in their head and think, well, obviously that's impossible. You can't fit millions of animals on that.
Right.
And honestly, they're right. You totally can't. But the models we are looking at today present a radically different approach to the problem. We are going to explore the proposed scale of this vessel, the mechanics of its internal systems, and the biological reality of the animals they suggest were actually on board.
To even begin to understand how the researchers posit the animals survived, we first have to understand the physical constraints of the habitat.
The size of the boat itself.
Right. The foundational element of the Ark Encounter model and the ICR research is the physical dimension of the boat. The historical record uses an ancient measurement called a cubit.
Which is what, the length of a forearm?
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
Researchers calculate it based on the royal cubit length. When translated into modern measurements, they propose the Ark was 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet high.
Okay, let's just pause and visualize that, because numbers on a page can easily wash over you.
They really can.
Think about a standard American football field. From end zone to end zone, that's 300 feet. The Ark, according to these models, was essentially a huge, sturdy, floating box that was 1.5 football fields long.
Which is massive.
It's mind-blowing. And 51 feet high is roughly a 5-story building.
The sheer volume is incredible, but maritime engineers are often more focused on the proportions. The length-to-width ratio of 510 to 85 is, well, it's essentially 6-to-1.
Which points to a very specific design intent, right? Like, it wasn't built with a streamlined bow for speed.
No, not at all.
It didn't have a giant rudder or sails for steering toward a specific destination. According to the research, it was, in the purest sense of the word, a survival barge.
Exactly. And the 6-to-1 ratio is actually fascinating when you look at maritime physics. If you were building a vessel whose sole purpose is to remain upright in chaotic, turbulent waters, you want to avoid structural failure from wave resonance.
Wave resonance, meaning, like, the way the boat syncs up with the waves.
Right. In a stormy ocean, a ship experiences pitch, roll, and yaw. A 6-to-1 ratio is highly effective at minimizing capsizing forces. In fact, many modern cargo ships use a very similar proportion for hull stability.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the models suggest it was specifically designed to withstand a scenario where the waters eventually covered the highest points of the pre-flood topography.
So the researchers are looking at a structure designed to take a relentless beating, stay completely watertight, and carry just an unimaginable amount of dead weight.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, those dimensions provide roughly 1.88 million cubic feet of internal space.
That's a lot of space.
It is, But even with a staggering amount of volume, even with a ship that is a football field and a half long and 5 stories tall, this raises an important question. It's the ultimate logistical puzzle that skeptics consistently point to.
Right, because the immediate thought is still, how do you fit millions of species of animals into even a five-story building?
You don't. The math simply doesn't work if you approach it that way.
Yeah, it really doesn't.
If you try to pack 2 of every single distinct species that exists on the planet today into that volume, along with the food and fresh water required for roughly a year-long voyage, the physical space runs out very quickly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When we look at the research from Answers in Genesis, we find that the assumption built into that skeptic's question represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the source material.
A huge misunderstanding.
According to the biblical framework, Noah didn't bring 2 of every single species we see today. That was never the directive. The text states he brought 2 of every land animal kind.
Yes, and the distinction between the modern biological term species and the biblical concept of kind, which is a field of study creationists refer to as baraminology, that is the absolute crux of their biological model.
It fundamentally alters the logistics.
Completely alters them.
I think a lot of people use species and kind interchangeably, and that's where the mental roadblock happens. We really need to look at how these organizations define a kind.
Let's use a tangible example, one that's featured directly in the Ark Encounter exhibits. They have a display detailing the ancestry of modern cats.
Okay.
They trace them back to representative creatures like the Proilurus, which is an extinct animal found in the fossil record. Today, obviously, we observe a vast array of cats.
Right. Big cats, little cats.
Exactly. We have lions roaming the savanna, tigers in the jungles of Asia, bobcats in North America, and, the domestic house cat. In modern taxonomy, all of these cats belong to the family Felidae.
The feline family.
Right. Because members of this broad family still retain the biological capacity to interbreed in certain circumstances.
Like lions and tigers, creating ligers, right?
Exactly, like ligers. Because of that capacity, the Answers in Genesis researchers propose that they all belong to the same original created kind.
Think of it like this for you listening. The model suggests Noah was basically packing the ultimate ancestral blueprint rather than every single modern showroom model.
That's a great way to put it.
Instead of going to the lot and putting a sedan, a sports car, a pickup truck, and an SUV onto the boat, he just brought the foundational engineering chassis from which all those other vehicles could eventually be built.
Yes.
So on the Ark, Noah didn't need an enclosure for the lion, and a separate enclosure for the tiger, and another for the snow leopard.
The model dictates he only needed space for one pair of the ancestral felid kind. Just 2 representatives.
That shrinks the passenger list dramatically.
It does. It implies that all post-flood felids descended from the specific members of this family that were on the Ark.
And the data presented at the Ark Encounter extends this to extinct variations too, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So the saber-toothed cat, the majestic African lion, and the tabby cat purring in your lap right now, the researchers trace all their lineages back to the exact same representative pair that walked off that 510-foot barge.
That's the model. When you apply this biological packing strategy systematically across the entire animal kingdom, grouping the canines, the bears, the equines, and even the dinosaurs into their broader family kinds, the space requirements just plummet.
It's incredible math.
Based on this framework, the researchers at Answers in Genesis calculated the Ark didn't need to hold millions of individual animals. They estimated it only needed to house around 7,000 to 8,000 animals.
That is a massive paradigm shift. We've gone from an impossible floating clown car to a highly rational, mathematically feasible survival habitat.
Very feasible.
Housing 7,000 animals inside a 510-foot-long 3-deck vessel is well within the physical capacity of that volume.
The physical space is sufficient, yes. But that introduces a completely different operational challenge.
Right, because they have to, actually survive inside the box.
Exactly. The survival of those 7,000 animals depended entirely on the internal ecosystem maintained inside the Ark.
Which brings us to the human element, the caretakers. According to the texts and the ICR data, this massive floating zoo, the entirety of the world's terrestrial genetic future, was cared for by just 8 people.
Hate.
Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their sons' wives.
Just 8 human beings responsible for the daily maintenance of thousands of animals for over a year.
I want you to really think about the mechanics of that. Imagine the daily routine of just 8 people managing the feeding, the watering, the health, and frankly, the waste management for 7,000 animals.
It's a daunting thought.
You can't just run around with a bucket and a shovel. The sheer tonnage of daily waste alone would be overwhelming. How did the Ark Encounter models propose they actually pulled this off?
Well, the researchers proposed that the Ark must have utilized a high degree of pre-planning and internal engineering ingenuity. For example, they modeled the use of sloped floors in the animal enclosures.
Okay, walk me through the physics of that. How sloped are we talking?
The floors would need a subtle gradient. If they are too steep, the animals, especially the heavy-hoofed animals, would suffer joint damage or slip in the damp environment.
Right, that makes sense.
But with a gentle slope, combined with the natural rocking motion of the ship, the daily waste would gradually work its way toward the back of the cages. And there, it could fall into centralized gutters or collection trenches.
Oh, that's brilliant.
This allows a few caretakers to clear massive amounts of waste efficiently, perhaps by just flushing the gutters with water rather than mucking out individual stalls.
And speaking of water, keeping 7,000 animals hydrated requires thousands of gallons a day. How do you manage a water system on a pitching deck?
It's a huge problem if you don't engineer for it.
Because you can't just have giant open vats of water. The first big wave hits, the water sloshes out, and your fresh water supply is just gone.
Right, so the exhibits model the use of gravity-fed cistern systems with internal baffles. Yeah, baffles are essentially interior walls within a tank that prevent the water from building up momentum and sloshing violently when the ship rolls.
Oh, well.
From these centralized protected cisterns, water could be distributed down through the decks using a network of bamboo or wooden pipes, gravity feeding directly into the individual troughs.
So instead of carrying buckets to every single cage, the humans are essentially just managing the central valves and letting gravity do the heavy lifting?
Exactly.
It's an incredible model of agricultural logistics.
It really is. And it also requires a sophisticated approach to ventilation.
Oh, because of the smell.
Not just the smell. The biological heat generated by 7,000 animals, combined with the moisture from respiration and waste, would create a toxic, stifling environment if the air remained stagnant.
Oh, right. It would become a greenhouse.
The Genesis text mentions a window or opening near the top of the ark. The researchers suggest this functioned as a thermal convection engine.
Meaning the heat from the animals naturally rises to the top deck.
Right. As the hot, stale air rises and exits through the top opening, it creates a pressure differential that actively pulls fresh, cool air in, circulating it throughout the lower decks without the need for mechanical fans.
It's fascinating to see how the researchers have reverse engineered these ancient descriptions using modern fluid dynamics and agricultural science.
It is.
But eventually, the rain stops, the waters recede, the ark comes to rest, and those doors open. And this is where the answers in Genesis model shifts from a marvel of internal engineering to a massive question of biology.
Yes. We have to contextualize the timeline the researchers are working with to appreciate the scale of their biological model.
Okay.
According to their historical framework, the global flood took place roughly 4,300 to 4,350 years ago.
Okay, I have to stop you there because the timeline is where I'm getting stuck.
Sure.
I want to push back on this because the mechanics just seem entirely counterintuitive. So to make sure you and I have this right, the staggering diversity of the animal kingdom we see today, from the bobcat in North America to the tiger in Asia, all unfolded from those original thousands of kinds in just a little over 4 millennia.
That is the model, yes.
But if animals can adapt and diversify into completely different species that incredibly fast, shouldn't we be seeing cats evolving into wild new forms in real time right now?
That is the exact question skeptics raise, and it perfectly highlights the fundamental difference between the evolutionary model and the creationist genetic model.
Okay, how so?
Well, we are culturally conditioned to think of biological change as a slow accumulation of new genetic information through random mutation over millions of years.
Right, that's what's in the textbooks.
But the researchers, specifically geneticists like Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, who work with Answers in Genesis, point to a mechanism driven by something called heterozygosity.
Heterozygosity. Okay, let's break down the mechanics of what that actually means.
In simple terms, it refers to the amount of built-in genetic variety an organism carries. The creationist model argues that when God created the original animal kinds, they were preloaded with vast amounts of genetic potential.
So they weren't just standard issue.
No, they weren't genetically identical clones. Their DNA contained the instructions for an enormous range of potential traits, different fur lengths, body sizes, coloring, and temperature tolerances.
I like to think of it like a compressed ZIP file on a computer. The original pair of felines on the Ark had this massive ZIP file of genetic data.
That is an excellent analogy. When the animals leave the ark, they enter a completely transformed post-flood world.
A very harsh world.
Very harsh. The researchers posit that this era included a rapid ice age, drastically shifting climates, and the formation of temporary land bridges. As the animals migrate and reproduce, they face severe environmental bottlenecks.
And those severe environments force the ZIP file to unpack.
Exactly. The environment doesn't create new genetic information. It sorts and isolates the information that was already there.
Oh, I see.
In a snowy, mountainous environment, the offspring that happen to express the pre-existing traits for thick fur and large paws survive and interbreed. The offspring with thin fur don't. Within a few generations, that population becomes highly specialized. We call it a snow leopard or a bobcat.
But in the process of specializing, they lose the other information, like the bobcat population no longer has the genetic information to easily produce a thin-furred, jungle-dwelling offspring.
What's fascinating here is that this explains your earlier pushback. The reason we don't see explosive, rapid diversification happening in cats today is because the ZIP file is largely unpacked.
Oh, wow.
As populations became specialized and isolated over the last 4 millennia, their heterozygosity, their genetic potential, decreased. They became highly specialized but genetically depleted compared to their ark ancestors.
That is wild.
The rapid diversification was a one-time event driven by incredibly rich ancestral DNA interacting with extreme newly formed environments.
That model really makes you look at every animal in a completely different light. When you walk through a zoo, you aren't just looking at random collections of traits. According to this framework, you are looking at the highly specialized, fragmented descendants of these rugged, genetically dense pioneers that survived the greatest geological catastrophe in Earth's history.
Yes. The researchers view these animals as living evidence of a brilliant biological design, programmed with the exact adaptability needed to ensure their survival in a chaotic, shifting world.
So what does this all mean? We started today by talking about that cartoonish image in our heads, the tiny, crowded boat that defies all logic and physics.
A bathtub toy.
Right. And by exploring the data and models provided by the Institute for Creation Research, Hansers and Genesis, and the Ark Encounter, we've seen how they construct a highly detailed alternative.
The very robust model.
They present a mathematically calculated 510-foot engineering marvel, a survival marge utilizing advanced agricultural logistics to carry the deeply complex, genetically dense ancestors of the modern animal kingdom, all maintained by the sheer grit and ingenuity of 8 people.
It shifts the narrative from a simplistic fairy tale to a complex exploration of maritime engineering, fluid dynamics, and rapid genetic expression. And if we look at the biological models they present, it leaves us with something quite profound to consider regarding the natural world around us.
I always appreciate a good final thought to chew on. What is the lingering question here?
Well, if the incredible diversity of modern animals, from the domestic house cat sleeping on your bed to the extinct saber-toothed tiger, blossomed from just a few thousand ancestral kinds over the last 4,300 years due to this incredibly rich built-in genetic programming, what hidden, untapped genetic potential might still exist within the animals we share our world with today?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Right. What subtle traits or physical adaptations are they still capable of, quietly waiting in their DNA for the right environmental pressure to call it forth?
Wow. That is an incredible thought to walk away with. What is still waiting to be unpacked in that genetic ZIP file? We want to warmly thank you for joining us today on this custom deep dive on the paradigm split. We hope exploring these models gave you a few of those aha moments and a whole new lens to view the mechanics of history through. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.